Very good to have you join us again on the morning show. We have someone with us.
Yes, Sam Amadi, who will be joining us from our Abuja studio. The Minister of Information, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, has once again accused former Vice President Alhaji Atiku Abubakar of masterminding a plot to undermine the government. How much of this is true and how much is fantasy? Well, we are now being joined by Dr. Sam Amadi, a public affairs analyst and politician. He ran for the governorship of Imo State during the last elections. Welcome to the program, Sam Amadi. Sam, good morning.
Thank you.
Yes, good to have you back on the morning show. Always a delight to have a conversation with you about Nigerian issues. But let's start with the recent statements by the Minister of Information, Alhaji Lai Mohammed. Twice in 1 week, he accused both the PDP and Alhaji Atiku Abubakar of trying to undermine national security, sabotage the government of the day, cause mayhem. And, you know, during the weekend, he said that government has credible evidence. What do you make of this? Is this a case of the APC and the PDP trying to stage a battle outside the tribunal, the election petition tribunal?
Well, I think going by the pedigree of Alhaji Lai Mohammed, a very smart lawyer who has been part of civil society and also experience in government, so both a technocrat and an intellectual of a sort, I think it would be really sad if these kind of statements are made often. And I think historically he has been making some seemingly very wild accusations, not just about this, before the election and even after. We expect two things critically. Nigeria is in a very fragile state situation right away, and if there are allegations of national security breach or planned or possible conspiracy or collaboration by persons, politicians to cause national security situation, I think that the least expected of a minister or anybody of high position in government would be, after this allegation, to come back later to the citizens with details. So we should be seeing things like arrest. If we can't arrest because of some consideration, we demand, and even the persons alleged against demand some level of credible evidence. So the public demands to ask for, how do you have this information? Especially because you are alleging against adversary parties, persons who are already in tribunal challenging election results, persons who are claiming to have been robbed of victory at the polls, and who have taken steps, you know, to challenge the government frontally. I mean, without prejudging the merit of the case at the tribunal, if it wins, succeeds, that means the end of APC government for second term. So you can reckon that these are real adversaries. So if one of the adversaries raises very fundamental, you know, allegations bordering on state security breaches, the least expect of such a public officer is to really come out and make clear presentation, even if you don't give us the details because of security implication, but we demand to have more substantial information other than we have credible evidence. We've had that several times, and we didn't see progress on either prosecution or, you know, or denying those, or coming back and apologizing that those information were fake. So this time around, I think the situation is so serious that we expect a more moral commitment, moral ethics and morality of public service demands that it shouldn't just end at another broad, you know, brush against Atiku and whoever is working with him. But at this point, even for public interest, we demand for information. We also demand for processing of this allegation. If there are credible evidence with the security about plans to disrupt, plans to cause public unrest, and to probably generally undermine the state, as it were, we expect that relevant agencies should be coming up with further information on that. Even if, for whatever reason, there will be no arrest, there should be credible information or statements from the DSS, NIA, or such other agencies, and not the Minister of Information. And so that's the first issue here. And the second issue really is maybe it could be time then for the accused persons to probably explore legal action against the Minister of Information, because really, you know, what this means in the terms of communication is you are debranding. You also, raising, you are incurring reputational damage to these very important, very high-placed politicians. Someone like me, if I heard that a presidential aspirant who is seeking to win back his mandate in the court is so callous and so unpatriotic to engage in actions that will undermine the territorial integrity of the country or create loss of life or in any way damage Nigeria's prospect as a nation, I would be pulling back my support for such people. So in a way, it's also demarcating. It's also, if it's false, that it's a very rough political tackle against Atiku and those who have been named. So I think it should be taken serious on both ends. The minister should come clear with credible information, or relevant agencies should start processing these allegations, or the Article 2 should also hit back. Yeah.
So both sides must prove or, debunk. But let me ask you, because some have said, this is all a ploy to muzzle opposition. How would you describe the tolerance level of the APC-led federal government tolerance to opposition in Nigeria?
Well, there are two ways to look at it. The party has been intolerant at the level of rhetoric. Let's divide it in two ways. Rhetoric. There have been so much being said against individuals, being said against even party members who probably express contra views. For example, we've had some of the party chieftains come heavily against members who want to run against stipulated directions. And so intolerance at the level of rhetoric, at the level of political speech is very high, in terms of the ruling party in the last 4 years. They have expressed, maybe in Nigeria there's a race to the bottom. Maybe some of their apologists will argue that, well, PDP did this, PDP did that. So there's a sense in which we are always justifying what we are doing now by saying PDP did that. But essentially, in objective assessment, we said this party, the leadership, has been very, very intolerant in terms of speech. Now, let's look in terms of action, statecraft. How has government been able to manage to deal with? At the level of federal government, really, at the level of the presidency, we can say that the president himself has not acted as intolerant as some of the party activists have done. We've seen also, for example, take for MBC. I think MBC's interventions and attempts at muzzling or constraining the radios and televisions from, being robust in expression of opinion is actually a kind of intimidation in that sense. So we've seen agencies being very intimidating and oppressive and intolerant in their regulatory activities, especially regarding political speech, which the U.S. Supreme Court has said, political speech is critical, as important as ordinary speech. Now, if you look at the level of state governors, we've seen also high level of intolerance. Of course, in Kaduna, our friend Mala El-Rufai have had serious brushes with media persons whose offenses have been perhaps some of them, retailed, not too accurate, or sometimes slightly infuriating, slightly obscene, slightly improper speech. But they have always come with sledgehammer. We had a case of a journalist who was jailed in Abuja here for perhaps making a statement not totally accurate about the DG of the Pre-Grievance Commission. These incidences illustrate a level of intolerance that border on a certain level of conservative conception of the state and the individual. I think there's a ideological problem here. It's a sense in which perhaps too much authoritarian logic in terms of state security, in terms of order, undermines or kind of rubs roughly against the sense of liberty and freedom. And so I think the ideological character of the ruling party and ruling government predisposes it to overreacting to the necessary nuisances and difficulties of democracy. And the idea I've always argued is that democracy is messy, but rightly so. That people are going to be saying things that are sometimes stupid, or sometimes obscene, or sometimes even really improper, but essentially legitimate, because it's part of expressing their own opinion as citizens. And so every sustainable democracy must come to grips with the fact that we're going to have this raucousness, if you like. We're going to have this lack of insolence and irreverence that's part of our pluralism, and of course part of moving in complexity that the modern state gives us. But I think some of these guys have a more Puritan view of life. They want to put everything in order, and so every speech must align. And this disposes the administration and the party to some degree of intolerance. So I think, yes, you can say that we've gone through a season of intolerance in terms of speech, in terms of ideas, and also in terms of statecraft, particularly in the regional governments and in some agencies.
Well, I mean, by way of information, the PDP has dismissed the allegation by the Minister of Information as irresponsible. And in another breath, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar's lawyers, Michael Zekome, SCN, and co., they've taken out action against Loretta Onochie, who is also one of the aides of the president, who allegedly on Twitter or on social media said that Atiku Abubakar is on a security watch list in the United Arab Emirates. Now, this brings me to the issue of the Peace Committee. Before the election, the Peace Committee, led by General Abdulsalami Abubakar and Bishop Matthew Azankuka, got the various political parties to sign a memorandum of understanding that, they will conduct themselves peacefully, and whatever the outcome of the election, there will be no attempt to heat up the polity. In 2015, that Peace Committee achieved its objective. Now, in 2019, it's like the politicians, particularly of the two major political parties, are not listening. What do you think could have happened? What could be responsible for this? After we saw all those photos before the election, people expressing good intentions and all of that.
Well, I think the critical difference here is that in 2015, a gentleman president lost election and accepted the outcome. And some people might argue, and some people did argue, that the elections were not as credible or as beautiful as many of us wanted to believe. But the President Jonathan accepted the outcome, and that is a keynote. It shaped behavior down the downward. So we saw also based on data, we saw less resort to litigation. That's number one indicator. So first, that election was far more credibly managed than 2019 election. Even though not perfect, even though there were allegations of underage voting, they spent the not. Secondly, President Jonathan exercised moral leadership. That's part of what we talk about, the bully pulpit, the power of presidents, whether incumbent or outgoing, to shape perception, to shape social behavior. So that very gallant behavior shaped subsequent behavior of other actors. So that's the second difference here. And the third difference is also that, you see, how you also manage victory matters, or procured victory. So we've seen, if you look at the landscape across the states, the elections are terribly managed the way that right now in many places there are 4 or 5 people who are receiving certificate of returns, and they're all going to court. In Imo State, for example, somebody had it, House of Reps, Kigwe, then it went to somebody else, they're in court. Many pre-election disputes. Because from primary, there was like a bedlam. We witnessed one of the worst primaries across all parties. And you have seen the result now. The costs are upsetting. The upsets in 2015 have been very few. In 2019, even we've not even gone down the legal process of tribunals. We've seen revocations, cancellations, nullifications. So it tells one story clearly, that the political culture and the political practice post-2015 has been very bad. And that's ironic, because we are also in a regime of intense war against corruption. How didn't we focus on political corruption? So we really we're in an environment that was both chaotic and corrupt, largely, politically. And so the result is elections or primaries that were totally, unacceptable, and then it unleashes this either impulse to revenge, to spoil something, or to get justice. So the peace committee's work, I had a conversation with Father Kuka just a week ago, and look, their work is more like, it's moral suasion. It's a sense in which they are trying to kind of help the politicians move away from real violence. And we can say that both Atiku and the president, the PDP and APC, after the elections in February, have done nothing really to undermine security. There have been no reported case of post-election violence across the country. So to that extent, the committee can say, well, we succeeded, to the extent that today we're not seeing what happened in 2011 when, after Jonathan's victory, there were cases of violence. So that's what they've achieved. They can say largely we contributed to that, but I don't even think so. I think it's also because of other factors. But let's look at it. What they did, they have no power. It's not well designed. That group has no capacity to change behavior of politicians. In the first place, if you look at the process, unlike under Jonathan, actually, when it looks like they had a little bit more mileage, much more influence in the party, at this election, they didn't quite have too much influence. They didn't quite have too much capacity to condition behavior pre-election. They had a few outings, and I would say that they are a little bit more diminished. For many reasons, many of the actors suffered some level of loss of political credibility. The secretary was branded an Atiku person because of the visit. The generals, basically, I think they don't have that level of political capital to reshape behavior of politicians. And I think it would be very, very presumptuous to assume so.
Let's look at the opposition itself now, the PDP. Has the PDP been playing a constructive role as opposition? Has the criticisms from the PDP been constructive? Or are they just fanning the embers of the challenges we have? I mean, some of the rhetorics from the PDP as well, as alleged by Alhaji Lai Mohammed, for instance, before the elections, the talk about the herdsmen killings would continue if the PDP is not voted into power. Things like that. Do you think that the PDP itself, has been playing a crucial role in the development of the country as an opposition?
No, I think PDP has been largely failing as an opposition party. You see, the PDP's messaging, for one, you can give only one credit. Kokola, the public secretary, has been very productive in terms of producing press releases, but they have not been strategic in their communication. The PDP has been awful reactive, actually, denying this and denying that, but not even shaping the narrative. Take, for example, run up to the election, when the issues around Waziri, the woman who was alleged to be close to the president, issues around the independence of the regulator, issues even around the process for the electronic transmission. PDP didn't show intelligence. I think PDP, since 2015, has had chronic intelligence deficiency. Their communications are not strategic or intelligent enough. They have been more reactive. They have actually been noisy, basically, And if you look at the fact that the last election, that was a question around reputation, you would have expected that since 2014, PDP would have repositioned itself in terms of reputation. It didn't build that, it didn't build back the moral armor around itself. It didn't reinvent and redefine its mission. It went into this election last minute without creating a change, a rebranding. And so their communication, they have not been able to have traction. They're not really, how do you measure it? For example, when they issue a statement, it doesn't solicit a lot of support on social media. People are not using their statement to raise questions and push back on the behavior or the statements of the ruling party. Their statements hit the ground and dries up because it does not connect. It lacks, they have not built that credibility, number one, and they're not very intelligent. They are even allowing moments of national movement to escape, to ooze away. So, for example, after the election, the conduct of INEC and the election, the issues even around INEC's alleged hostile relationship in terms of allowing them to kind of look at the servers and other things that INEC have not done well. PDPs, when they get hit by APC or the government, they don't turn that into a narrative about democracy and make it become an issue and see themselves as a champion of the common good. There's a sense in which PDP has been fighting as just this band of people who want to take power, but not as the conscience of the people. This is a time for PDP to have created a much more strategic communication and manned by persons who can tap into existing credibility with the civic society. They lost that civic space in 2015. They have not regained it. And that's why I think it's part of APC's very, very shambolic leadership in the last years as a party. The PDP has not made any gains from that. APC has not. APC is a disintegrated party, but PDP is not pulling its weight, and PDP is not providing hope for Nigerians who want something better.
Point well made. Well, Sam, let me bring up another issue that is in the news, particularly on the front pages of newspapers today. The governors are challenging the Nigeria Financial Intelligence Unit over the guidelines that the NFIU, as it's otherwise called, has put in place in terms of the autonomy of local governments, the financial autonomy of local governments. And they are, calling on President Buhari to call the NFIU to order because they believe that the NFIU is acting ultra-vires, and they are also threatening to go to court. What's your take on this?
Very good question. I think the governors are right. I think NFIU has good intention, but it's really acting beyond its powers. They have no capacity and mandate to legislate process. They have a capacity and mandate to investigate, to track information intelligence. And then let's start from the process. First and foremost, everybody agrees that the governors have destroyed the authority of government, and the impact is enormous. Today, when I ran for primaries under APGA, went to the whole of government, Nigeria's crisis of development and governance is actually a rural phenomenon. It feeds from the collapse of the rural economy, collapse of rural governance. In the rural areas, there is no economy and there's no democratization. And we know from history of democracy that democracy is a town hall phenomenon that grows and become an urban and national issue. So if you're not creating the democratic accountability, if you're not creating economic transactions in the local area, you cannot create a strong economy, you cannot create a strong democracy. So the concern to track revenue resources to local area so as to grow a local economy and stem the urban-rural migration and also destroy the rural poverty is a good one. But then how do you proceed? 3 issues are very clear. One, the Constitution provides for autonomy and as well as democratic governance. Today, there are countable numbers of local governments that are managed by elected officials. How do we allow an abnormality to become normal? So the first response should have been that of the president, meaning the Constitution says every local government should be democratically elected. Therefore, if I was Attorney General, I will advise the president to issue an executive order and say no allocation to local governments that are not elected, because the Constitution envisages that those allocations are based on the fact that there's going to be a democratically elected government at the 3rd tier. So if you don't have it, you don't have those allocations. They are going to be warehoused until you create that democratic governance. Now, if you do that and the governors have elected local government councillors and chairman, there are chances that even if the chairman is a PDP and the governor is a PDP, some of the councillors will be APC, and so you create contestation. The idea of democracy is check and balances. Create adversary interests so that people can checkmate each other. Now, if you do that, you create a pressure on governors to use the resources. That's one aspect. The second aspect response will be, so there should be an executive order from the president saying, if you have no local government elected officials, no allocation. Now, to take it one step back, the Supreme Court ruled under Obasanjo when Okonjo-Iweala tried to help deal with this crisis in a creative way by creating a physical regulation that creates monitoring capacity by federal government. So when they give you the money, they monitor it. The Supreme Court says this is unconstitutional, which I think the Supreme Court was wrong, in my view, but that's the law. So in that case, therefore, you can't have any other agency control of that fund in a legal way. Then the third point I would like to make is very simple. Presidents have control power through granting aid. That's the idea of project-based governance. So the president can use UBEC, all these funds, to incentivize these states to create their own fiscal and budgetary regulation laws in line that allows these funds to flow. So my own remedy is a more complex one. You have to deal with the democracy deficiency in the local area by empaneling full democratic governance at the local level. That's the first solution. Second solution, you are going to incentivize good behavior, good state legal framework through tying releases that are discretionary to good behavior, namely state laws that create transparency and accountability. And thirdly, very important, the EFCC and the NFIU has mandate to investigate intelligence and prosecution of corrupt behavior. Now, the governors have immunity. How about civil servants who aid and abet this embezzlement of local government funds? We can now say, okay, why the governors have immunity? Why don't the EFCC deal with these lower-level officers so that you create rebellion internally? Once the civil servants know that they are going to be picked and jailed, they're not going to facilitate this corruption at the state and local government levels of government. So my approach will be one that is legal, constitutional, but has programmatic capacity to change behavior at the local level. So I think the governors are right in saying, look, NFIU does have, yeah.
We have just a few minutes left on this segment, but I don't want you to go without you commenting on another topical issue. And this has to do with the statement, the reaction to the statement attributed to former President Olusegun Obasanjo, to the effect that, the herdsmen problem that we have has to do with the attempt to Islamize and Fulanize Nigeria, and that Boko Haram terrorism has gone beyond unemployment, lack of jobs, and all of that. And we have commentators divided between North and South. What's your take, quickly? We just have a few minutes left.
Well, I think quickly, the president, notable for speaking his mind, it's a bold statement, but I would take it to two parts. I agree with the president that the federal government handling of the herdsmen issue and the Boko Haram issue is like kid glove. The print is correct. They were not dealt with drastically and in an impartial manner. The government created a sense in which there are some perception that these guys have official pass-through. That's right. But the issue of whether that's the issue around federalization and Islamization, I think at the level of President Obasanjo's pedigree, I think I agree with Sule Lamido that that statement ought not have made in a church. It has a capacity to really divide and create a sense in which we'll go away with the Christian-Muslim crisis. I don't think it's necessary for this country. I agree with the president that this government has not been, the failure, the crisis in this state in terms of security is a failure of rule of law. It's a failure of the government to be very objective, firm, and impartial in the position of justice. And you can't get that if you have a security of only one ethnic stock or one religious stock. And so it's a self-inflicted crisis, and Obasanjo is right in that diagnosis. I'm not sure he's right in thinking that this is a bigger script of Islamization in West Africa and Florida. Even if it's true, I don't think that's the kind of truth you should say in a church, and that kind of truth that should come from a statesman of that level. So I agree with Lamido on that point, but I agree with Obasanjo that this government did not manage this crisis with the level of objectivity, impartiality, and firmness in rule of law that was required. And that's what made it degenerate into now a very, very ungovernable and unmanageable crisis.
Well, thank you very much, Sam Amadi. Thank you. We've enjoyed this segment with you very much. Thank you. All the best. Enjoy the rest of your day.